When I think of the Economist, I think of some kind of august, center-right-leaning official record of the global economy. I don't think of a very tall man in an orange and plaid suit doing pelvic thrusts at you. This is not your father's Economist, apparently, so well done. Just give a round of applause for the level of creativity that we've got going here. This is my great-grandfather, Benjamin Lonesome, born in 1870 in Caroline County, Virginia, born a slave, taught himself to read, moved to Washington, D.C., worked for the Highway Department building roads. Now, born in 1870 and born a slave seem to be contradictory bits of information, considering that slavery ended in 1863. So either my family mythology is a bit off, or the U.S. government was less speedy about taking slavery down than it was in setting it up. I'm going to bet on the latter. This man had two daughters, one of whom was this woman, Lorraine Martin, the first black employee in the U.S. Supreme Court building. I didn't find this out until 2005 when my own mother passed away, and we're going through all these files, and we see these newspaper clippings like, yo, that's grandma? And President Jimmy Carter's giving her a commendation here to recognize her contributions. She had but one daughter, my mother, Arnita Thurston, who is pictured here in very adorable fashion. You can see where I get it from. It runs thick in the blood. Now, her mother was super accomplished, worked in the Supreme Court, big community member, taught Sunday school, traveled a lot, loved her life, didn't always love raising a kid. And so she sent my mother at age 8 off to boarding school in rural Pennsylvania. This is 1948. Send a little black girl off to boarding school in rural Pennsylvania. My mother was not amused. And I know this because she wrote letters, and we found some of the letters that my mother wrote. Here is one such letter. Dear Mother, I am having fun, but I do not like it here. I am mad at you. Please send me some cookies and a Sparkle Plenty doll. Please send it because I do not have anything to play with. Yours truly, Arnita. Obligatory awe, it's adorable. Her handwriting is horrible, but I'm not a cruel critic. What I want to focus on is the lower left corner. You see the word over written in a whole different typeface, and when you turn this letter over, you find another letter which says, if your little girl is dissatisfied, we'd be glad to have her bed for children who are anxious to come. Signed, Sister. It's essentially NSA wiretapping 1948 style. Little black girl wants a cookie, that's a threat to the nation. Alert the authorities, have the warden read the mail. So for a while, my mother played the part of the modern Negro woman. Here she is with a dress below the knees, with a basket full of fresh roots and presumably conformist attitudes toward America's political system. But she was not long for this view because she changed her social network and started hanging out with dudes like this. A man named El Dorado, like the car. There are a lot of cool people represented at this conference. You may think you know cool people in your lives. You do not. This is the last cool dude to walk the earth. And his name was El Dorado. And my mom went further. This is her in the middle of the streets, African Liberation Day parade. She's mugging the camera. The revolution may not be televised, but if it's photographed, I want to be head-on looking good, have my hair done up just so. So when you have a mother like this, that is so political, you don't get normal books as a kid. This is the first book I remember having. At 8 years old, I was given This Is Apartheid, a pictorial introduction. It affects your view of the world. And because of my mother's efforts, I was able to navigate this world, especially this one. This is the reverse shot out of our front window. We lived in D.C. This is the Columbia Heights neighborhood in the 80s, and it's basically like living on the set of The Wire. You got a lot of police corruption and brutality and murders, everything The Wire had except the universal critical acclaim and the undying love of white people who saw it. That would come later. This is me at Sidwell Friends School, where I was legally allowed to beat up white people. It was great. It's the only forum where that was allowed. And this is my graduation from Harvard University, where my mother said, "We did it," and it was a collective "we" that she exclaimed, which spanned not just me and her, but the time and space between many generations to get all of us to that moment. So now I want to talk about where stories are and can go. That was one flavor of it. I'm very impressed with the power of humor to cut through nonsense. And when you take a look at the absence of press freedom around the world through a map such as this, you see a lot of red and dark areas where freedom of speech isn't so respected, and the media doesn't get to tell that story that the people need to hear. So you look at alternate outlets, you look at the comedic outlets, you look at someone like Bassem Youssef, who was credited as being the Jon Stewart of Egypt, who said, "We've just become so tense about so many things. If people deal with serious issues through laughter and sarcasm, it would be a great thing." And that guy is still going strong in Egypt. He got really big around the revolution and has even more to say now. Or you look at a place like Nigeria. In this story, Nigeria to have more pastors than congregation in 20 years. A story that gives you a window into the culture. You don't have to be from there to get what's going on in terms of the relationship with the church and the society. Or you go to Venezuela, and you see a story like this, which essentially credits the president there as saying, if I lose, the only songs you'll hear on the radio are by Maná. And they are a sort of rock en español group, very popular, very irritating. And so this is Hugo Chávez's attempt through the satirical voice of this newspaper to cling to power by a very cultural threat of annoyance through your radio waves. Or you have a cartoon like this. This is made by a guy named Salman Arbabi. He runs two very popular shows in Iran from the US. It's among the top shows in the country. He's recognized at falafel stands across the world. And he has been able to use his art in a very political and journalistic context. When you can make fun of yourself, people are more receptive to what you have to say. His shows are Parazit and On 10. And then you have in Afghanistan, a place that is so wrecked by generations and maybe even millennia of conflict, with its own version of The Office. As an actual sitcom, the show got so popular that the British ambassador played himself on the series because he wanted that cultural credibility. Now, there's a downside to this story. One of the actresses in the show has had to go into hiding due to death threats because some of her friends were killed by men in their village for deigning to not wear a burqa all the time and to have an opinion and to walk tall and be an independent force. So the flip side of that is an organization called the Afghan Women's Writing Project, which actually funds internet cafes, mentors, and secret lessons to get the stories of the women of Afghanistan out, not mediated through the men of Afghanistan. Telling our own stories is as important to a certain kind of survival as food and shelter. To tell one's story is a human right. That's what the founder of the Afghan Women's Writers Project said about the power of storytelling to articulate oneself and one's freedom. The next example I want to give you is not only of the stories and who tells them, but how we can give a different level of access into them. When I wrote my book, I went into a very radical direction. I let people see my computer screen while I wrote it. I called it live writing, and you could virtually look over my shoulder. And a lot of people, use the software that I use for software development, for product demos, for tech support. It wasn't designed to indulge in the vanity of the author, but I chose that path anyway, and there was a chat room. Here's what people had to say as they watched me tell this story. It gives me a connection with the author. That's pretty cool. How self-obsessed does one have to be to set something like this up? Very, very self-obsessed. You gotta love yourself a lot. Just the little I've read here makes me want to buy this book. Excellent. It is interesting to see his writing flow. Most writers had never seen up close the writing process. If you can actually see someone crafting the words in their book, you are standing too close, and a restraining order may be due. I am surprised to see Baratunde use semicolons. This was an interesting remark. I don't know if I give off an anti-semicolon vibe, or if this was some sort of punctuational racism. I'm like, we have a black president now. I feel like black people can use all the punctuation available to us, but not according to this person. And then this is the best quote of all. My girlfriend is Chinese, and I'm half Jamaican, half regular black. I think our kids might end up Dominican or something. And there is so much to sort of dive into with this. Let's start with the concept of regular black, which for me evokes images of Black Zero and Diet Black. And then the idea that your kids would be Dominican is an obvious nod toward racial mixing and the brownification of the country through interracial relations, but I like the idea that they would have an actually Dominican kid who speaks Spanish, loves mofongo and baseball. And she's like, well, how did we get this? I don't know. Or something, maybe not a kid at all. Maybe they'd have a banana or a plantain. Like, anything is possible when Chinese and a half Jamaican, half regular black procreate. So I will go ahead and move through the rest of this and just conclude by saying there's one case I wanted to highlight of the ability to use stories as a platform, to invite others to tell theirs on top of yours, whether you have the permission of the original storyteller or not. And that is this Tumblr blog called Planned Parenthood Saved Me. And my friend Deanna Zant set this up after the Susan G. Komen Foundation decided to be idiotic about its support for Planned Parenthood. And hundreds and hundreds of women told their story of how this organization did so much more for them than provide abortions in big quotation marks. And it really helped move the needle of public opinion and media impressions around this controversial story. That's the book. If you don't buy it, you're a racist. It's very true. And I guess I will conclude by saying in the future, we're all Dominican or something. Thank you very much.